Okay, so you know that feeling, right? When you're just frantically taking notes and you're not even sure if it's helping you remember anything.
Uh-huh.
Today, we are diving deep into the science of note-taking,
That's right.
trying to give you some actual research-backed strategies so you can actually use this skill effectively.
You got it.
And look, we all take notes in some way, shape, or form, whether it's for, school or work, or even just for our personal lives.
Mm-hmm.
So this is something that we think could really benefit everyone.
Absolutely. I mean, it's one of those universal things we do, but how many of us really know how to do it well?
Right, exactly. And, there's a ton of information out there about note-taking. There's all these different methods and strategies.
Yeah.
But we really want to kind of cut through all that noise and get to the core of what the research actually says about what works.
That's our mission today.
So to do that, we're going to be focusing on a really fantastic research paper by Kenneth Kira. This is from 1989 called A Review of Note-Taking, the Encoding Storage Paradigm and Beyond.
Classic paper.
Now, it's a little bit dense, but it gives this really comprehensive overview of decades of research on note-taking.
Yeah, it really brings together a lot of what we know about the psychology and the cognitive science behind it.
And our goal today is to distill, the key takeaways from that research and figure out how you, our listener, can apply them to your own note-taking.
Exactly. Whether you're a student, a professional, or just someone who wants to remember things better, this is for you. So let's get started.
All right, so to kick things off, where should we even start?
I think the best place to begin is with those two fundamental functions of note-taking.
Okay, the two functions.
Yeah, like way back in 1972, these researchers, DeVesta and Gray, they kind of laid out this idea that note-taking does two main things, encoding and storage.
So encoding and storage, those are the two big ideas.
Right.
Okay, break it down for me. What exactly do those mean in the context of note-taking?
Well, think of encoding as what's happening in your brain while you're actually taking those notes.
Okay, in the moment.
Exactly. It's that mental process of selecting information, putting it into your own words, and trying to organize it as you write.
So it's active.
Very active. And the idea is that this active processing can help you learn and remember the information better.
Gotcha. So that's encoding, happening right there as you're scribbling away.
Right. Now, storage, on the other hand, is more about the value of having those notes later on as a reference.
Okay, like an external memory bank.
Exactly. It's the idea that you've created this record that you can go back to and review, which can help reinforce what you learned and make it easier to recall later.
Makes sense. So encoding is the process, storage is the product, and they both contribute to book learning.
You got it.
Yeah.
And a lot of the research that Kira reviews in his paper dives into how effective each of these functions is and what factors influence them.
Okay, so let's dig into the research now.
All right, so let's start with the storage function. Because this one is pretty straightforward, and the research is pretty clear on its benefits. I mean, it's intuitive, right? You take notes so you can look back at them later.
Yeah, it's like having a cheat sheet for your brain.
Exactly. And Kira's paper highlights a bunch of studies that show that reviewing notes actually does make a big difference. Like, one of the stats he cites is that across 24 different studies, students who reviewed their notes consistently outperformed those who didn't on tests.
That's a pretty solid finding, isn't it?
It is. And here's another interesting tidbit he mentions. None of the studies found that reviewing notes was actually detrimental.
Huh. So it can't hurt.
Right. It seems like reviewing your notes, no matter how you do it, is pretty much always going to be helpful.
Okay, so we can say with some confidence that the storage function of note-taking is definitely a good thing.
Yeah. And it might seem obvious, but it's good to have the research backing it up, right?
Absolutely. Now let's talk about the encoding function.
Okay.
This seems a little more complex.
It is a bit more nuanced.
Because like you were saying, it's about how the act of taking notes itself, the mental effort involved, might be helping you learn the material.
Right. You're engaging more deeply with the information as you're trying to capture it.
But the research on this doesn't seem as clear-cut as it is for the storage function.
No, it's not. Kira looked at over 60 studies on encoding.
Wow, 60.
And the results were all over the place.
Okay, so break it down for me. What did the research say about encoding?
Well, he found that about 35 studies showed a clear benefit for encoding.
Okay, so more than half.
Yeah. But then 23 showed no real difference between note takers and those who just listened.
Really? So for those 23, it didn't matter if they took notes or not.
Exactly. And to make things even more interesting, a handful of studies, 3 to be exact, actually found that not taking notes led to better results.
Wow, so in some cases, it was actually better to just listen and not take notes at all.
Yeah. It seems counterintuitive, but that's what some of the research found. And that's why researchers have tried to figure out what factors might be at play here.
Yeah, because there must be something going on that makes encoding helpful in some situations, but not in others.
Right. And a couple of things that seem to play a role are the pace of information delivery and the density of the material.
Okay, so how fast someone's talking or how much information they're throwing at you.
Exactly. And there's research to back this up. Like one study found that when information was presented really quickly, it actually hindered encoding.
So if you're just trying to keep up with a fire hose of information, you're not really processing it deeply enough for note-taking to help.
Right. And the same goes for really dense material. If there's just too much information packed in, it can overload your cognitive resources and make it harder to encode effectively.
I've definitely been in those lectures where I'm just trying to scribble down every word, and I don't even know what I'm writing anymore.
Uh-huh. We've all been there. You're so focused on getting it all down that you're not really thinking about what it means.
Exactly. So it seems like the encoding benefits of note-taking really depend on how you're approaching it and what the learning situation is like.
It does, and that brings us to some really interesting theories about how we actually learn from notes.
Okay, so let's get into some of these theories.
All right, so one of the key ideas is what's called generative learning.
Generative learning, what's that all about?
Well, the basic premise is that the real learning happens when you're actively trying to connect new information to what you already know.
So it's not just about memorizing facts, but making those connections and building a deeper understanding.
Exactly. And the idea is that note-taking can really facilitate this process.
How so?
Well, when you're taking notes, you're not just passively copying down information. You're having to make choices about what to write down, how to phrase it, and how it relates to other things you've learned.
So there's a lot of mental processing going on.
Right. And some researchers believe that this is where the real learning happens.
Okay, so generative learning is about connecting the dots, and note-taking can help us do that.
Precisely. Now, this idea has been supported by some research. For example, studies have found that note-takers don't always do better on tests that just require rote memorization.
Okay, so they don't necessarily have an advantage when it comes to just remembering facts.
But they often do better on tests that require them to apply what they've learned in new and different ways.
So they're better at what researchers call far transfer.
Exactly. And this makes sense, right? If you've really understood the concepts and made those connections, you should be able to use that knowledge in a variety of situations.
Yeah, that makes sense. It's like the difference between knowing the definition of a word and actually being able to use it in the sentence.
Perfect analogy. And Kira's paper highlights another interesting finding related to this. He points out that note-takers tend to recall more of the important ideas from a lecture, even if they don't capture every single detail.
So like the act of taking notes helps them filter out the most crucial information.
Right. And it suggests that even if your notes aren't perfect, they can still serve as a really valuable guide for your learning.
Okay, so encoding can be tricky. It's not always a guaranteed benefit.
No, it's not. But it can definitely enhance learning, especially when it promotes that generative process of connecting ideas.
And it seems like having those notes to review later, even if they're not perfect, can be a real asset.
Definitely. The storage function is still really important.
Okay, so let's talk about situations where you maybe don't have time to review your notes, or maybe you missed a lecture entirely. Is there any value in having taken notes in the first place, even if you never look at them again?
That's a great question. And, research has actually looked into this. And even without review, the findings suggest that the more complete your notes are, like the more the key ideas you actually manage to jot down, the better you're likely to do on tests.
So quantity matters.
To some extent, yeah. Because it's not just about having something to look back at. It's about the process of taking notes itself, forcing you to process and organize the information, even if you never revisit those scribbles. And there are some studies to back this up. Like one study found that participants were about 47% likely to recall information they had written down in their notes, compared to only about 17% for information they hadn't noted.
Oh, wow. That's a huge difference.
Right. So even if your notes aren't perfectly organized or comprehensive, the act of writing something down can significantly boost your chances of remembering it later.
So jotting down even a few key words or phrases could make a difference.
It seems so.
Okay, so taking notes, even without review, can still be beneficial.
Yeah. But, and this is a big but, the reality is that most of us aren't capturing everything.
Yeah, I was going to say my notes are never that complete.
Mine either. And research actually backs that up, too.
Oh, really?
Oh, yeah. Studies have found that students often record less than 40% of the main ideas presented in a lecture.
Less than 40%?
Yeah.
Oof. That's a little disheartening.
I know, it makes you realize how much we're actually missing, even when we think we're taking good notes.
Okay, so if our notes are probably going to be incomplete anyway, what about just getting a complete set of notes from somewhere else?
Ah, like from the instructor or a classmate.
Exactly. Would that be just as good as taking our own notes?
That's a really interesting question, and the research has looked into this too, comparing how well students do when they review their own notes versus notes that were provided to them.
Okay, so what does the research say? Is it better to use your own notes or someone else's?
Well, it depends on a couple things. Like if you're trying to remember something right away, immediately after a lecture, it seems like reviewing your own notes is more effective.
That makes sense. Your own scribbles and shorthand might trigger your memory better.
Right, there's that familiarity factor.
Yeah.
But if you're studying for a test that's further down the road, the research suggests that there's often no significant difference between reviewing your own notes versus someone else's,
So for long-term retention, it doesn't really matter whose notes you use.
as long as you review them.
Okay, so as long as you have a decent set of notes to study from, the source doesn't seem to matter as much.
Right. Now, there is one caveat to this. One study found that if students had a really long time to review a set of notes, like 30 minutes, and those notes were super detailed, they actually did better than those who were using their own notes.
So given enough time and detail, provided notes could actually be more beneficial.
Yeah, that's what the research suggests. And there's even more research to support this idea. Like some studies have found that students who didn't even attend a lecture, but just studied a complete set of provided notes, could actually outperform students who attended and reviewed their own notes.
Wow, really? So just having access to a complete set of notes, even without going to the lecture, can be better than having incomplete notes from attending.
For certain types of tests, yes, especially those focused on remembering facts. It really highlights the importance of having a comprehensive and well-organized resource to study from.
Makes sense. You're not trying to piece together a puzzle from scattered pieces. You have the whole picture right in front of you.
Exactly. So the key takeaway here is that if your goal is just to remember information, having a complete and well-organized set of notes is crucial. Whether you took those notes yourself or got them from someone else might not matter as much.
Okay, so having a complete set of notes is key.
Yes.
Now, this makes me think about borrowing notes. You know, it's such a common practice if you miss a class or a meeting. But is there any actual research to support this? Like, is it really an effective way to catch up?
Well, Kira and his colleagues actually conducted a study specifically looking at this.
Oh, cool. So they actually compared students who borrowed notes to those who took their own.
Exactly. And they looked at a bunch of different types of tests.
So what did they find?
Well, on most of the tests, the students who borrowed notes performed just as well as the students who took and reviewed their own notes.
Okay, so borrowing notes isn't necessarily a bad thing.
Right. But here's the interesting part. On one specific type of test, the note borrowers actually did better.
Really? Which type of test?
It was a test that required them to synthesize information, like to take the ideas from the lecture and put them together in new and creative ways.
So it wasn't just about remembering facts, but about understanding the connections between them and applying them in a different context.
Exactly. And on this test, the students who borrowed notes actually outperformed the students who took notes but didn't review them.
That's really surprising. Why do you think that is?
Well, the researchers speculate that it might have something to do with cognitive load.
Okay, explain that one.
So when you're taking notes during a lecture, you're having to do a lot of mental work. You're listening, you're processing, you're deciding what to write down, and you're actually writing it. That's a lot for your brain to handle.
It's multitasking on steroids.
Right. And that cognitive load might actually interfere with your ability to make deeper connections and see the bigger picture.
But when you're reviewing borrowed notes,
You don't have that same cognitive load. You can focus solely on understanding the information and making those connections.
that makes a lot of sense. It's like you have more mental space to really dig into the material.
Exactly. So borrowing notes might not just be a last resort, it could actually be a strategic advantage in some situations.
Okay, that's really interesting. So if you're borrowing notes, or even if you're using notes provided by an instructor, is there a certain way those notes should be structured to be most effective?
Yeah, that's another important question, and Kira actually looked into this too. He compared how well students learned from lecture material that was presented in 3 different formats:
Okay, what were the formats?
full text, a detailed outline, and a matrix.
A matrix, like a table with rows and columns.
Exactly.
Okay, so which format was best?
Well, both the outline and the matrix were better than just reading the full text.
So having some kind of structure, some organization was definitely helpful.
Definitely. But the matrix format really stood out when it came to being able to apply the information in new situations, like in those FAR transfer tests we talked about earlier.
So matrices were best for understanding the connections between ideas and using them in different contexts.
Precisely.
Why do you think matrices are so effective?
Well, think about how a matrix is structured. You have information organized along both a horizontal axis and a vertical axis.
Right, so you can see relationships between categories of information, not just within a single category.
Exactly. Like, let's say you're taking notes on different types of plants.
Okay.
You could have a row for each type of plant and then columns for things like their characteristics, their habitat, their uses. And by looking at the matrix, you can easily see how those different aspects relate to each other across different types of plants.
So you're forced to make comparisons and see the bigger picture.
Exactly. And that deeper level of understanding can be really helpful for applying your knowledge in different situations.
Okay, so when it comes to provided notes, a matrix format seems to be the way to go.
It's definitely worth considering.
Okay, so let's say we have our notes, whether we took them ourselves, borrowed them, or got them from an instructor. How do we actually go about reviewing them in a way that maximizes our learning?
Well, this is an area where the research is a little bit less clear-cut. We don't have tons of studies specifically on the optimal way to review notes.
So there's no magic formula.
Not exactly, but we can look at research in related areas, like how people learn from reading text, to get some insights.
Okay, so what does that research tell us?
Well, it suggests that reviewing information multiple times is generally better than just once, and that spacing out those review sessions over time can be really beneficial.
So spaced repetition is a good thing.
Yeah, it seems to be. And there's some research to suggest that reviewing closer to the time when you need to use the information can be particularly effective.
Like right before a test.
Exactly. So while we don't have a precise formula for reviewing notes, those general principles seem to apply.
Okay, so multiple review sessions, spaced out over time, and closer to when you need the information.
Yeah, that's a good starting point. Now, Kira also highlights some research on specific review techniques that can be helpful.
Like what?
Well, one technique is to try to reorganize the information in your notes into different categories.
So not just passively rereading them, but actively engaging with the material.
Right. And studies have shown that this type of active reorganization can improve both immediate and long-term recall.
So it forces you to think about the information in a different way.
Exactly. And another technique that can be helpful is to use a matrix to classify the information.
What we were talking about earlier.
Exactly. So even if you didn't take notes using a matrix, you can still create one during review as a way to organize and connect the information.
Okay, so reorganization and matrix classification. What else?
Another technique that's often mentioned is elaboration.
Elaboration, so adding more details or connecting the information to things you already know.
Right. Now, some research suggests that simply outlining your notes might be better for remembering facts.
So keeping it concise.
But if you need to apply the information in different situations, elaboration can be helpful.
So the best review technique might depend on what you're trying to achieve.
It probably does. And it's worth noting that there's some debate about whether relying too heavily on personal elaborations can actually be detrimental.
How so?
Well, if you're adding a lot of your own interpretations and examples, it might make it harder to distinguish between the core material and your own thoughts about it.
Ah, that makes sense. You could end up remembering your own elaborations instead of the actual information.
Exactly. So it's important to strike a balance between making connections and staying true to the source material.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground here. We talked about the encoding and storage functions, the benefits of reviewing notes, the importance of completeness, the effectiveness of borrowing notes, and some strategies for both taking and reviewing notes.
Yeah, we've covered a lot.
Now, let's shift gears a bit and talk about how we can actually improve our note-taking in the first place, like while we're in a lecture or a meeting.
All right, so back to that encoding stage.
Yeah, because even though the research suggests that the storage function might be more important overall, there are still things we can do to make our note-taking more effective in the moment.
Definitely. And one simple thing you can do is to pay attention to external cues.
External cues, what do you mean?
Well, like if an instructor writes something on the board or uses a visual aid, that's a pretty strong signal that the information is important.
It's like they're highlighting it for you.
Exactly. And research has shown that students are much more likely to include information in their notes if it's presented visually.
That makes sense. It's like the visual medium just makes it more salient.
Right. And another strategy that can be really helpful is note-taking training.
So actually learning how to take better notes.
Yeah, there are programs that teach students specific techniques like how to identify key points, how to paraphrase information, how to organize their notes.
So it's a skill that can be developed.
Absolutely. And these programs have been shown to be effective in improving the quality and quantity of students' notes.
Okay, so we can actually get better at note-taking with some guidance and practice. What else?
Well, one of the most powerful things you can do is to simply have more exposure to the material.
Like listening to a lecture multiple times.
Exactly. Studies have shown that viewing a lecture multiple times leads to much more detailed and higher quality notes.
That makes sense. The first time you're just trying to grasp the main ideas, but the second time you can focus on filling in the gaps.
Right. And you can also pick up on those subtle points that you might have missed the first time around.
And even just having the option to pause and rewind can be beneficial, like when you're watching a video lecture.
Definitely. It allows you to control the pace of information and make sure you're capturing everything you need.
Okay, so repetition is key.
It really is. Now, when you are taking notes, whether it's during a lecture, a meeting, or while you're reading, what are some specific strategies you can use to make better connections within your notes themselves?
Okay, so we're talking about the organization and structure of our notes.
Exactly. And one strategy that research has shown to be effective is using what are called skeletal outlines.
Skeletal outlines, what are those?
Well, imagine a traditional outline with main headings and subheadings, but instead of having all the details filled in, a skeletal outline just gives you the main structure and leaves space for you to add the details yourself.
So it's like a framework for your notes.
Exactly. And studies have shown that students who use skeletal outlines tend to perform better on exams.
That's interesting. Why do you think that is?
Well, it probably has to do with the fact that a skeletal outline forces you to be more active in your note-taking. You're not just passively copying down information. You're having to think about where it fits into the overall structure.
So you're making connections as you go.
Right. And that deeper level of processing can lead to better understanding and retention.
Okay, so skeletal outlines are a good strategy. What else?
Well, we've already talked about matrix frameworks.
Right, where you organize information along two axes.
And research has shown that using matrices while you're taking notes can also be really beneficial. It helps you to see those relationships between different categories of information, which can lead to a deeper level of understanding.
So for complex topics, a matrix might be a better choice than a linear outline.
It could be. It really depends on the nature of the material and what you're trying to achieve.
Okay, so we have some good strategies for improving our note-taking. Now, let's revisit this idea of generative note-taking.
Okay, the idea that the act of taking notes helps you connect new information to what you already know.
Right, and you mentioned earlier that the research on this isn't always clear-cut.
It's not. While it's a popular idea and it makes intuitive sense, studies that have actually looked at the content of students' notes haven't always found a clear link between those notes and better problem-solving skills that would suggest generative processing is happening.
So we might think we're making those connections as we write, but it might not actually be happening as much as we think.
That's what some of the research suggests, and it's also been really difficult to experimentally get students to actively connect new information to their prior knowledge during a lecture.
So it's a hard thing to do in real time.
It seems to be. It might be something that's better done during review when you have more time to reflect and make those connections.
That makes sense. It's hard to both capture new information and deeply analyze it at the same time.
Now let's talk about some other factors that can influence how effective our note-taking is.
Okay, like what?
Well, one factor is our working memory capacity.
Working memory, so our ability to hold and process information in our minds.
Exactly. And some research suggests that people with better working memory might benefit more from taking notes.
That makes sense. If you can juggle more information in your head, you're going to be better at processing and encoding new information.
Right. And studies have also found a connection between working memory capacity and the amount and quality of notes people take.
So people with better working memory tend to take more detailed and better organized notes.
Yeah, it seems so.
Okay, so our cognitive abilities definitely play a role in how effective our note-taking is. What else?
Well, another factor is our prior knowledge about the topic.
So how much we already know about what's being discussed.
Exactly. And research suggests that note-taking can be especially helpful for learners who don't have a lot of prior knowledge.
That's interesting. Why do you think that is?
Well, It might be because note-taking helps them to build those initial connections and frameworks that someone with more background knowledge might already have.
So it's like note-taking helps them to catch up and make sense of the new information.
Right. And it's also been found that note-taking can help learners with low prior knowledge to do better on those far transfer tasks where they have to apply their knowledge in new situations.
So it's not just about remembering the facts, but about being able to use them.
Exactly.
Okay, so prior knowledge matters. What else?
Well, another factor that Kira mentions is our cognitive style.
Cognitive style, what's that?
Well, it's basically our preferred way of learning and processing information. Some people are more independent and internally driven, while others are more reliant on external structure and guidance.
So like some people thrive in unstructured learning environments, while others need more support.
Exactly. And this can definitely affect how we approach note-taking.
So someone who's more independent might be fine with just jotting down keywords and phrases, while someone who needs more structure might benefit from using a detailed outline or a matrix.
Precisely. And the research actually supports this. Like one study found that learners who were more field independent, meaning they were good at working on their own and figuring things out for themselves, did better when they were allowed to take notes freely.
Okay.
But learners who were more field dependent, meaning they needed more structure and guidance, did better when they were given more structured note-taking tasks.
So it's really important to understand your own cognitive style and tailor your note-taking strategies accordingly.
Absolutely. Now, as we wrap up this deep dive, I think it's worth reflecting on how the research has actually changed our understanding of those two fundamental functions of note-taking.
Okay, so encoding and storage.
Right. The traditional view was that storage was about having those notes to review later, and that encoding was what happened during the act of taking notes.
Right, that's how we defined them earlier.
But some researchers have argued that this view is a bit too simplistic.
Okay, so what's the more nuanced view?
Well, they point out that the traditional storage function actually involves both encoding and storage. Because when you're reviewing your own notes, you're not just passively absorbing the information, you're also reactivating those mental processes that happened when you first took the notes.
So you're encoding it again.
Exactly. So they've proposed that we need to separate out these two functions more clearly.
Okay, so how do we do that?
Well, they suggest that the true storage function can only be studied by looking at situations where someone is reviewing notes that they didn't take themselves.
Okay, so like when you're borrowing notes or using instructor-provided notes.
Exactly. And when you do that, you're eliminating the encoding component and just focusing on the storage benefit.
Makes sense. So what have they found when they've done this?
Well, their findings have been pretty interesting. They found that even just reviewing notes without having taken them yourself can be really beneficial.
So the storage function on its own is powerful.
It is. And in some cases, it's been shown to be even more effective than taking notes without any review.
Wow, so just having access to a good set of notes and reviewing them can be more beneficial than just taking notes and never looking at them again.
That's what some of the research suggests. However, it's important to note that when both encoding and storage are given ample opportunity, the combination of both is still generally superior.
So the best results come from both taking and reviewing notes.
Precisely. But the research does challenge the traditional view that the encoding function is always the most important one.
Okay, so it's a more complex relationship than we might have initially thought.
It is, but I think the main takeaway here is that both taking notes and reviewing them are important for learning.
And that having access to a good set of notes, whether you take them yourself or get them from someone else, is crucial.
Absolutely.
Well, this has been a fascinating deep dive into the science of note-taking. So for you, our listener, what are the key things to remember?
I think the biggest takeaway is that